Alright guys, so mine the Polo, but I'm doing product overviews. I'm going to be doing a lot of them. If that's not your tea, that's fine, but I feel like there's going to be some useful information to the guys that are just getting started, and this also helps you support the channel if you check out peakmlephysique.com and get stuff from there. So I just wanted to run that by you guys beforehand and before we actually get into it. PMP water trap. You will receive the water trap and a 16-inch silicone tube. If you bought this with the penis pump kit and it was included, then you'll get a vacuum handle as well. This is not included with the auto pump kit because water and electricity do not mix. Simply to set up, you're going to cut the silicone tube about 4 inches or 12 centimeters. In that way, you can still use this half of the tube for normal air pumping and still keeping it relatively comfortable. So to connect it, all you got to do is put the silicone pieces back onto the lid of the water trap, and then to connect it to the vacuum handle, simply just put the silicone tube onto the vacuum handle, and now you've installed a water trap onto your manual hand pump. So a few important things to know about the water trap is that it can only hold about 120 milliliters or about a half a cup of water. It is not going to stop an entire cylinder filled with water, but it will help you prevent water getting into your manual vacuum handle pump. If this ever gets close to being full, all you do, take off the lid, dump out the excess, put it back on. You will have to disconnect from the pump beforehand, otherwise you'll lose that vacuum pressure. So for this demonstration, I'm going to use a pump sleeve available at Peak Physique as well, but you don't need it for water pumping. It just makes it easier when it's not connected to your. So the amount of water you need is going to largely depend on your size and how much cylinder you have to work with. So a larger individual like him is going to need less water than a smaller individual like so, and I'll show you why in a second. So depending on your size is going to depend on how much water you need in the cylinder, and I'll demonstrate that in a second. But what we're really going for is that when we insert our penis into the penis pump, we only want the water line to come to the very tip of the glands, because that gives us a lot more room to keep water out of our manual hand pump and make sure the water trap does not overflow. An average size man using a 1.75 cylinder is probably going to need about 3 to 4 inches of water in the cylinder. Now, easy way to think about it is the cylinder is 9 inches long, therefore we need to be at the 6-inch mark or the 5-inch mark to get what we need roughly to cover the shaft. So we'll fill that up. That's 6. We'll go to 5, just it's a little more than 5. Average man, when you insert, keep the cylinder down. And we're actually going to remove the pump sleeve. When you insert, keep the cylinder down. Now, when we flip it vertical, this is actually a little bit too much water. But point being is that we still have all this room here for the water to travel up without it getting into the hand pump itself before we even need to use the water trap. For the point that I'm making, larger individual, this is going to be above average individual, using the same size cylinder with the same amount of water, almost comes to the top already. We do not need to be completely submerged in the water this deep, just enough to get to the water line. For a man that big, and honestly he probably needs a 2-inch cylinder, we're going to only use 3 inches of water, which is right up to the 6-inch line when you're measuring it like this. Flip, and just about perfect. Now, the other important thing to note is when we are pumping, we are trying to stay as vertical as possible to keep as much air up at the top. The more and more we tilt, the closer the water gets to the gasket. And then if we go below, the water's not even on the shaft. It's actually all just being pulled out by the vacuum handle, which is going to make it really easy to overfill the water trap. So this is how it should be to start. You have a sizable amount of air while your glands are still covered. Obviously, the longer you get, the less likely you'll have a sizable amount of air. There are different cylinder sizes and lengths for that reason. In a perfect world, when we pump up, we will not have any water travel up. And that's why we want to make sure we just stay in level with the glands. Now, if we go forward a bit, like so, that's when the water trap is useful. It starts pulling out the water instead of air, and we're actually collecting a bit in the cup. To fix that, first remove from the cylinder, unscrew the cap, dump it. That simple. So what we don't want is this to be completely full to start, because then we are going to have to fill the water trap completely before we even come to full pressure. While not necessarily a bad thing, it leaves very little room for error. Granted, since this is rubber, we already hit 18 inches of mercury, which is unsafe. But we did collect a bit of water. If we keep going, we collect more water as this expands, but since it's not a penis, it's not going to expand like that. But point being, you do not want it full like this. Have about 2 inches of safety, so that way you don't have to constantly be doing this. There we go. That actually pressurized the water trap. So a few things we need to consider is we only want to use oil-based lubes like coconut oil when we're using the water pump, because if we're using something that's water soluble, it'll just dissolve into the water and that'll introduce friction. Water's actually not that good of a lubricant. Then another thing we need to worry about is, since water does not compress, and that's why it's really good at expanding the penis, it also can cause a lot of bruising and something called petechia, which is little red dots on the skin. Basically, since the water cannot compress, it instantly transfers all that pressure to the penis, and that causes the tiny little blood vessels in your skin to rip open. So if we're not careful with our pressure, meaning that we just go slow, we're more likely to cause petechia and minor bruising.